In these days of social media, 24-hour news channels and overdosing on information in an internet overflowing with dodgy ghouls howling to do your own research, we easily forget that not too long ago there was an established media with which society could collectively claim this is the truth. Underground publishers who printed up pamphlets, posters and dodgy magazines were the only alternative to the established behemoths of information.
Can you state categorically...
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you state categorically that nobody... No, Mr. President-elect, that's not appropriate.
But every revolution needs its central point for its philosophers to expound their plans and values. And in the Amsterdam of 1965, the countercultural revolution was in full swing, and they were taking a swing against the likes of the Telegraph, a newspaper that was the sworn enemy of PROVO. The youth had been summoned by the witch doctor, Robert Jasper, whose happenings at the Spou were growing every week. The time was right, the city was ripe, and two lads were ready to harness this atomic energy and steer it towards their own goals, the complete overhaul of society and the replacement of capitalism with anarchy. And they would do this by launching their own underground magazine where they would publish their manifestos and attack a plastic society. This is chapter 3 of the Shite Guide to PROVO. There goes the neighborhood, here come the provos. Working for the man is a no-no. Staying on the low-low, playing with the po-po. When you're with the crew, you're never gonna roll solo. There goes the neighborhood, here come the provos. Trying to give the world back its mojo. The people with no hope need to go loco. Here come the provos to fuck up the whole show. At the Saturday night happenings on the Spou, every weirdo and artist in the city was to be found, watching the bizarre events unfold around the statue of Het Liefertje. You could taste the revolution in the air, just as tangible as the taste of a police baton smashing in your teeth. Walking around the crowds at the happenings were two young anarchists, Roel van Duijn and Rob Stolk, handing out their pamphlets calling for an anarchist society and attacking the powers that be. They realised that the smoking magician had awoken a sleeping giant, the discontented youth, dubbed the Monster of Amsterdam.
Spicy, 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 spicy.
So they decided it was time to join forces with the witch doctor himself to help spread their word. And in doing so, they launched the next step on the road to the anarchist revolution. So I think it's time we meet the two characters on our journey through the madness of the mid-60s. Roel van Duijn was a 22-year-old veteran of the Ban the Bomb movement, and when he got expelled from school for his shenanigans, he moved from his home in The Hague to Amsterdam in the early 60s to continue his quest to change society from an uncaring capitalist system to a more caring anarchist system. He was involved in several underground newspapers and was no stranger to the police. One day, his newspaper was sent a letter from a lad called Rob Stolk, a native of Zandam who had the same beliefs in pacifism and the smashing of the upper classes, and wanted to use his printing skills to team up with Roel and start their own publication. They knew that if they could get their messages out to the youth, the revolution they wanted to start might just stand a chance. And they had their first meeting in Café Chaos, a bar in which a Tinder date told me that she may have given me chlamydia. So Roel and Rob discovered that, like Robert Jasper, they both wanted to gather the discontented youth under one banner, and Roel found his new movement's cause within the dissertation of a certain Mr. Wouter Baukhausen, who discovered the behaviour of the discontented youth of the day, and these guys were called the Nosems. The Nozems were a generation of disaffected youngsters who grew up in the shadow of the Second World War. The Netherlands was going through an economic boom and new consumer products were being showered upon the recently invented concept of teenagers. But having a sweet new moped isn't really going to overcome living through the hangover of the greatest war in the history of the planet. So the Nozems drifted through life untethered by responsibility and acting like little shits. Baukhausen's dissertation stated that their only purpose was to provoke the police, and so he called them PROVOs. The report said that all they wanted to do was provoke the authorities, so Baukhausen named them PROVOs. And this was the word that lit the fuse. Roel and Rob had their new movement's title, PROVO, and they had their cause, to radicalize the Nozems to their cause, to change them from the proletariat to the provotariat. And so they began their underground operation, printing up pamphlets that they called provocazis, one of which was about the royal wedding of Princess Beatrix to the German lad Klaus. So they printed them up, they posted them and handed them out all over the city. And they gained some publicity when a certain Provo member called Olaf Stolk began slipping them into copies of the Telegraph newspaper in the shop he worked at out in the airport, Schiphol. He was fired from his job, but getting fired for a provocation was a badge of honor for a Provo. Olaf? You're fired, Olaf. They admired Robert Jasper's wild techniques of rallying the youth, and they were regulars at his happenings on the Spout, and they'd be there handing out their provocazis to Robert Jasper's audience. And eventually, Robert Jasper invited them to his house here in the Jordan neighbourhood, where they decided to join forces. They would merge their movements together for the ultimate effect, and when Rob and Roel came back to the Spout, and they began handing out provocazi number 3, decrying the fascists that the royal family were marrying, the law came down hard on them all.
Here come the popo polizzi, coming for my feetsy. Here come the polizzi, the popo, coming for the provos. Here come the popo polizzi to stop my exhibitsi. Oh, here come the polizzi, the popo, oh no, the popo.
They were brought to court over the publication for breaking a law called lèse majesté, which means that it was illegal to insult the monarchy. They were also caught for copyright infringement for using photos that they didn't have permission for. Scoundrels. But anyway, all of the copies of the provocazis were seized by the cops, and it would prove to be only the first in a long line of seizures of this dangerous written material. But the best was yet to come. And many a shitstorm was about to be unleashed on the unsuspecting public when the new mouthpiece of the movement was published, the central point on which the revolution swung. Roel and Rob upped the ante yet again, and they catapulted the movement into the public consciousness when they released PROVO magazine.
Oh man, I touched down bang in Amsterdam in the year of 1965. 66, feeling fine in the mix with a spliff up in my lips, and I skipped through the city on my getaway sticks. There were preachers and students and groovy amusements. The city at the center of a worldwide movement. Running in the alley, sunning in the square. There was smoke at the rally, there was something in the air, and then that's the sound of the police sticking feet on the ground on the beat around the town. And then that's the sound of the police. See, the siren is pounding, the hound and the sheep, and it was anarchy. Gonna be some trouble tonight, yeah, anarchy. We're gonna bust your bubble tonight. Anarchy, gonna be some trouble tonight. There'll be some rubble chucking motherfucking trouble tonight.
On July 12th, 1965, PROVO #1 came off the press and into an unsuspecting street. The magazines were to be sold cheaply to make it easier to spread the word, gather new members, and to lay out the PROVO's plans for the future, and most importantly, to provoke. The first edition, it laid out their manifesto, some anarchist lessons, and other funky shit. And in an attempt to provoke the powers that be, it included an old anarchist recipe for making homemade bombs. And at the end of this recipe, they glued a couple of little bangers. And when you popped these inconspicuous little fellas, your revolution had begun. And it all got cooked up and concocted on this little street here, Karthouserstraat, where Rob and Roel lived along with a couple other provos. It was the perfect setup. Roel, the anarchist theorist, and Rob, the master printer. And here they would produce their dangerous writings on an old printing press, and they'd hold meetings with the weird and wacky characters of the underground scenes, plotting the revolution.
Today they carry on their tiny war against apathy from a cellar in Amsterdam, publishing a newspaper and concocting their madcap happenings. Sympathisers say they represent a nation's conscience. Enemies say they're junkies, beatniks and juvenile delinquents. Their aim, to provoke into change a society with too many material values, can be identified with most anarchist movements. The important difference is that the provos are growing in influence and power. Their newspaper shouts its warnings about affluence to 20,000 subscribers each month.
When they started getting investigated by the police and the secret intelligence services, they were going to have to move their PROVO press from the house here to different locations regularly as the police raids grew more and more frequent. And they were usually one step ahead of the fuzz, you know. A giant game of cat and mouse would begin, and the raids and arrests followed. And this little house in the bohemian neighborhood of the Jordan became ground zero of this playful rebellion.
What is the provotariat? Provos, beatniks, pliners, nosems, teddy boys, rockers, hooligans, students, artists and misfits. Those who don't want a career and who lead irregular lives. Those who come from the asphalt jungles of London, Paris, New York, Moscow, Tokyo, and those who feel ill-adapted to this society. The provotariat is the last element of rebellion in our developed countries because the proletariat has become the slave of the politicians. If the provotariat lacks the strength for revolution, there is still provocation. It is our last chance to smash the authorities and their vital soft parts. By our acts of provocation, we force authority to tear off its mask. Uniforms, boots, truncheons, fire hoses, police dogs, tear gas, and all other means of repression the authorities hold in reserve, they must be forced to use against us. They will thus be forced to show their real nature. They'll make themselves more and more unpopular, and the crisis will come. It is time to provoke.
Over the course of the 2-year movement, 15 editions of PROVO were printed, with the money raised was being used to fund their increasingly outrageous pranks and provocations. And each edition would focus on different aspects of the social revolution. And it's through this magazine that they launched their famous white plans.
Since black is the traditional colour of anarchism, the Provos inverted this and took white as their movement's colour, and their white plans were designed to tackle the biggest issues of the day. The White House plan was to tackle the housing crisis, the White Chicken plan was to turn the police into social workers, and the White Chimney plan was designed to mitigate pollution. But their most famous scheme, the White Bike plan, would revolutionise city living forever. Over the coming chapters, we're going to delve deep into these ideas to show the real genius of the PROVO movement.
In PROVO, edition number 7, a clearly satirical article had been written calling for the eye tunnel to be blown up and for its architect to be assassinated. The architect in question wasn't afraid. He was more kind of flattered to be satirized by the group because he was a cool guy with a sense of humor. The Dutch government, unfortunately, had not evolved the cognitive faculties to take a joke. And instead they declared that other mentally unstable people might also not understand the concept of humour. And so the prison sentences flew like confetti. 6 weeks for Roel van Duijn, 4 weeks for Rob Stolk, and 3 weeks for Lud Schimmelpenninck.
Up in the Jordan on Carthauser Strat, the typewriter in the attic went a rat-a-tap-a-tap-tap. Rob Stolk looking out over the town, and Roel van Duijn living 2 floors down. The printer and the anarchist assembling the magazine, the saboteur, the satirist, the match and the gasoline, trying to manifest the unrest. What a mess, printing up the manifesto on the PROVO press. And then next, I heard a yelling at the door in swept 10 police, and then 10 more. The agents of the state came to check under the floor. They found 300 copies, but we still got more. And they said, anarchy, anarchy, we can't back down. Yeah, anarchy, Rob Stolk and Roel van Duijn. Anarchy, anarchy, out in the town. You wanna build it up, you gotta tear the whole thing down. They said, anarchy, anarchy, we can't back down. Yeah, anarchy, Rob Stolk and Roel van Duijn. Anarchy, anarchy, out in the town. You wanna build it up, you gotta tear the whole thing down.
So as the arrests continued and the sentences increased, questions began to be asked about whether the judges involved were acting without bias. And this, of course, played right into the hands of PROVO, proving an obvious propaganda purpose. But it also kind of, expanded their guerrilla theatre beyond the streets and into the halls of power. Yeah, boy. Anytime a PROVO was brought before the law, the grey world of officialdom would have to face off against the ludicrous tactics of the provotariat.
Here come the popo politie, coming for my feetie. Here come the politie, the popo, coming for the provo. Here come the popo politie to stop my exhibitie. Oh, here come the politie, the popo, oh no, the popo.
Thus, with every confrontation between the rational and the irrational, the tension increased and the power of the magic centre grew ever greater. And in the next chapter, we're going to check out some of the famous white plans, including the one that had such an impact that its effects are still visible and made Amsterdam the city that we all know and love today.